From the Zimmerman Symphony Center in Canton, Ohio, this is Orchestrating Change. I'm Matthew Jenkins Yarashevitz, Associate Conductor of the Canton Symphony Orchestra.
And I'm Rachel Hagemeyer, Manager of Education and Community Engagement.
We are so glad you could join us.
This podcast navigates issues that exist in the field of classical music and the world at large. We invite you to listen with open ears as our guests share their experiences and as we discuss these often avoided topics.
We are thrilled to be joined today by pianist extraordinaire Michelle Cann. She has performed as a soloist with many of this country's finest orchestras, including the Philadelphia and Cleveland Orchestras and the Cincinnati, New Jersey, Atlanta, St. Louis, and Detroit Symphonies, among many others. We are beyond fortunate that she has managed to fit the Canton Symphony Orchestra into her busy schedule this year, joining us for our Masterworks concert on October 30th. A champion of the composer Florence Price, she gave both the New York and Philadelphia premieres of Price's Piano Concerto in one movement, and also recorded the work in a remarkable COVID-19 era recording session with the New York Youth Symphony. She earned her bachelor's and master's degrees right up the road from us at the Cleveland Institute of Music, then went on to pursue an artist's diploma at Curtis, where she is now a member of the faculty. Michelle Cann, it is truly an honor to talk to you today. Welcome to Orchestrating Change.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
We're so happy to have you with us and so excited that you're going to be here with us in Canton. Can you just introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about how you grew up and music and how it was a part of your life and all that good stuff.
Absolutely. So I grew up in Florida, right in the center of the state in Avon Park, Florida. And for those that haven't heard of the small town there, it's south of Orlando by a little bit. And I grew up in a very, very musical family. My father is he's a music director at a private school that covers kindergarten through 12th grade. And he has many, many ensembles under that title. So he has choirs and bands and even steel drum band, which is a unique offering, sort of around the country in different schools. Piano is one part of my life. And then on the other side of this, like steel drums, where I would play Caribbean music and Latin music and all sorts of various styles. So at any rate, my upbringing was one in which piano was definitely the primary focus. My parents wanted us, all my three other sisters, to play instruments. And but piano was the first one they started us all on. And honestly, I think that I was the most motivated at that instrument, even though I did play trombone, violin, tuba at one point, steel drums, and of course sang in the choir. So again, we were part of all of my dance ensembles, but I was extremely motivated at the piano. Not to mention my older sister, who 6 years my senior, was already quite a good pianist when I started at the age of 6. And so I was also just trying to be like my big sister. We all know about that. Yeah. Much to her annoyance in certain ways, but that was a good thing, and definitely a good kind of thing to copy. So she was a good influence, and both of us ended up pursuing careers in music and in piano. So
wow. Wow.
Amazing. Wow. So you started playing professionally at a very young age. You started performing concertos at a very young age.
14. I forget exactly how old you were, but yeah.
What is it like at someone so young? What is it like to walk out on stage with a professional orchestra?
Yes, you are correct. I was 14 the first time I had a chance to play with an orchestra, and it was the Mendelssohn Piano Concerto. And it is an interesting concerto in terms of form because it runs as one continuous piece. Each movement is meant to be played without stopping, which also is unique with my residency in Canton because with the burlesque, that also doesn't fit into a typical form of a piano concerto 3-movement style, or the Florence Price. And so anyway, I'll never forget this first experience because I have a funny story attached to it. We were at a festival in Tennessee. So it was with this orchestra at the Southern Adventist University in Tennessee. And there is a big music festival that would happen. I think it was once a year. My dad had brought, the band members up and such, and orchestra members. And so a lot of my friends were there. And part of this was going to be my performance with the orchestra. And so that day, much earlier in that day, we had all gone to the mall. And as you know, the whole group was dropped off at the mall. And my father told everyone where to meet and at what time. Now, being the typical 14-year-old daughter, I didn't listen to anything that he said. I think about the only thing I sort of caught was the time, but I paid no attention to where. But I assumed, of course, that, the group of friends that I left the van with paid attention. At least one of us must have paid attention. Nope. All of us had no idea what he said. And of course, at this point in time, no, we did not have the iPhones we have now where you just text and find the answer. So I remember that we just obliviously and happily went about our way shopping in the mall, having fun with the other teenage girls. And then we remembered the time and we were, where were we supposed to meet? And nobody knew. And I thought, okay, now we're in trouble. So we tried various things. We figured, let's just walk around, we'll find them. We went out to the parking lot a couple of different times, hoping to see. We couldn't even remember where the van had parked. So ultimately, it must have been about a 2-hour delay. And I'm not kidding you. Like, the concert was that night. And I think I was almost on the brink of tears, mostly because I knew how mad my parents must be and worried. And so then finally, I think we made our way out to the parking lot again. And then we were spotted. And, they got us, and because everybody was waiting for our group. And so we had to rush to the hotel to get me dressed for the concert. Now the concert was in like an hour or something ridiculous. And they're rushing me there, trying to get me ready. We get to the concert and I was so frazzled. Now, the concert ultimately went quite well, all things considered. Thankfully, but very few people know that, as exciting as it is in my resume to say, oh, my first orchestral appearance at 14, that almost didn't happen because I got lost at a mall.
Oh my gosh.
Because I'm a teenager that doesn't listen. Anyway, that was fun.
Michelle, I have to tell you, that is one of the funniest life stories anybody has ever told on the podcast. I'm laughing so hard, I'm almost crying over here.
Oh my gosh. That's so, well, you playing as this young person with young people problems of not listening to our parents, but then having to go on stage and be professional. I mean, it's just such a great reminder. I think people forget that people who play on stage professionally are just people and have lives and do things, and like it's just normal. And so it's so interesting that you went from that as a 14-year playing to then going on pursuing it at a like learning level as a college student. So you went to the Cleveland Institute of Music and then eventually to Curtis. So how did you transition yourself from a young performer into a rigorous student at these very prestigious institutes of music and learning and conservatory? So how was that transition for you?
Well, I mean, I have to say, if anything, the first thing that comes to mind was the encouragement in being amongst peers who were focusing at the level that I was trying to focus and study at, that came to pursue music in a professional career. And one thing about the town I grew up in, and trust me, looking at my life now, I kind of really appreciate the balance. I really do. But I grew up in a small town where I was the best in my age group. You know what I mean? At least, at the piano or whatever. And there were some, a handful of other serious students studying piano or studying other instruments. But generally, I was the one that was kind of doing the most, as some may say, in my younger studies. So much so that in that town, there really weren't any teachers that could meet us at the level that my sister and I were rising to. So for instance, we would travel to Lakeland, Florida, which was about an hour away, for piano lessons every week. Eventually, with a different teacher, I was traveling 2 hours to Tampa, Florida. So, not to mention the violin that I played, I used to play in the Florida Symphony Youth Orchestra in Orlando, which was an hour and a half from my house on Sundays. So it even got to the point where towards part of my high school, I was homeschooled because it just became too much to figure out how to manage a school schedule, practice, and driving to these lessons. So, I had this childhood where I was doing a lot of competitions. I was driving for lessons. I was, trying to practice as much as I could. But my friends and peers, although I had some really great friends that totally understood what I was doing, but at the same time, I was, again, that teenager. I just wanted to fit in. I think that that's almost always there, right? And so when you don't have your peers working in the same way that you are, to the same extent of, disciplined, a lot of people don't get that. Like with piano, you have to spend hours alone at the piano every day, right? Not to mention, homework that all kids do, but, just this idea, why do you need to practice this much? You're already good, so this is what's around me. And so sometimes, thank goodness my parents kept pushing. I really think that it was tricky sometimes at home because I definitely had that streak where I loved piano, but I didn't always love to practice.
Oh, yeah.
And I always find it funny when people assume that about me or other artists at times. They're like, oh, you must have just loved it all the time. Oh, you're so good because as soon as I say my dad was a musician or teacher, they're like, oh, that's why. I'm like, no, that's not why. Like, do you really think it's like a magic wand? Like I just came out of the womb, like, okay, here comes virtuoso. It's like, it doesn't work that way. It literally requires focus and time and discipline. And that does not come by accident. That comes by parents that set up a household in which that's an expectation.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that there aren't students or kids who find themselves, more independent eventually, which eventually I was, to go to their instrument and practice and sit there. I'm not saying that never happens, but the idea that this is just a given because my father was a musician is, something I'd like to expel right here on this podcast and anywhere else, because it just simply is not true. If you have kids of your own and you think that because your child doesn't run to the piano or whatever instrument they're playing when they get home from school, that means they don't like it, or, they don't want this, then you are vastly misunderstanding the concept you guys brought up earlier, that just because we play a musical instrument, we're all human beings and we have generally the same tendencies.
Yeah.
Which is that we do not want as kids to have to work for anything. Like, if it can just happen, that would be nice. Like, honestly, I said as kids so that I felt better about myself. I still don't want to have to work for it. I mean, if I could just sit down and, I'm tired, right? I think that this is something I talk about because I say it comes from that the teachers, the community, the parents that support the children, but also instill, discipline and focus into their environment, because that's how we all succeed, is because we had that support for us to stay on task, right? So anyway, once I got to Cleveland Institute of Music, just down the road, of course, I now for the first time was around 24/7, I'm around peers and I'm making friends with people who are all there for music. They all understand I have to practice for this many hours a day. You can be hanging out and eating in the cafeteria and say, okay, I have to go practice for 2 hours, and no one's batting an eye. So I think for me, that just sums up sort of that childhood and then that transition that was extremely motivating.
Yeah. Wow. I love that you bring that up, because I think that's such a good point, that like young people, even like students in our youth symphony, sometimes will be self-conscious about the fact that they like don't enjoy practicing sometimes. and I always say, it's, you're not always going to enjoy this. but
Yes.
because it is work.
Of
and
course.
I think understanding that that's work, but we can still find joy in it, is that beautiful thing that I think young people sometimes have trouble understanding and they get self-conscious about it, and they're like, but I think that's such a great thing to remind us of, is that, okay, no, there's so much that goes into this. So yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And I know, I totally agree. And I think I appreciate how you put finding joy, because that is exactly what my experience was. Sometimes I definitely fought back, depending on the day or the teenage year I was in, on, sitting down and working at, working on the instrument. But the one thing my mom always mentioned was sometimes I might fight to get to the piano, but she never had to fight to keep me on the piano. And that was interesting, because once I actually started to play and started to work on pieces and, getting through repertoire I enjoyed, especially, I would just, she might say, come on, sit there. When I was little, sit there for at least half an hour. I'd often go over that because, for me, I did enjoy making music. I did enjoy, creating this, right in front of me. And so I do like how you said that. It's important to see that there's value. Yes, it's work. But if this is something that you're passionate about and you enjoy, then you will feel that reward.
Yeah.
A friend of mine referred to this concept of activation energy. If you can just get yourself to start, then you can keep going. And I certainly found that with studying scores as a conductor, is once it's like, oh God, I have to learn this long piece and the score is this thick and it's going to take forever. But once I start, then it's like, okay, then I get into it and I stop thinking about how much time has gone by. So yeah, the activation energy of just getting going.
I always say, like, the hardest part about practicing bassoon for me is putting the bassoon together.
Yeah.
Because there's 9 pieces and it takes so freaking long. But once I put the bassoon together, we're fine. I just have to put the bassoon together.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
So let's talk a bit about Florence Price, because Florence Price is a composer that I had never heard of before COVID-19. And I had the opportunity, when there were no concerts going on, I had the opportunity to deliberately discover music that I didn't already know, orchestral music that I didn't already know. And Florence Price was among the composers I discovered. And I loved her music so much that I programmed the first symphony with our advanced youth orchestra last fall, and it was a tremendous success. And several of the kids told us later it was their favorite piece they ever played in youth symphony. So I would love to hear your story about how you came to know the music of Florence Price and why you are championing it in the way that you are.
Absolutely. And I think the story that you just told is definitely part of the why, just because this is really such great music, right? And I love hearing this feedback from the young musicians in the youth orchestra that are saying that they were so musically inspired by her symphony, which is great. You're talking about Symphony Number 1.
Number
right?
1, yeah, in E minor.
It's a good one to start with. I mean, they're all so good. But oh my goodness, that was the one, of course, that won the huge Wanamaker music competition prize, and therefore was premiered by the Chicago Symphony Orchestra in 1932.
Yep.
And for good reason. I mean, it's such a fabulous piece. But yes, I like to start with that because the music is so powerful and so moving. It is soulful. It's as if every time I play her music or hear it, I just feel like she's there. I mean, she speaks through her soul, her very soul. Her life experiences are embedded in the pages of her music. And as much as every composer obviously has, their own stamp or connection to whatever they wrote, because of course, they wrote it. So, but there's something about Florence Price's music. Sometimes composers, and I'm looking at different pieces, and I can sort of see from a sort of intellectual standpoint or even theoretical standpoint, what their style is and what their stamp is, right? So with Florence Price, I go beyond that layer and I get the sense that she is bearing her soul. So, another composer I feel that way is Brahms. right? There are just certain composers that, at least for me, I'll play certain pieces by them. And I feel like they're in the room with their diary is in front of me, like their deepest, darkest secrets and wants and, the pain and the beauty of their life and whatever is just right there in front of me. I've met Brahms through his music, and so there's something that's so, for me personally, I love when I feel that sort of very human connection. And that's what I feel about Florence Price's music. It's just, there's this absolute connection to her soul, to her heart. And every piece, you feel it. But to tell you, yes, how I came across her, it wasn't too long before you did, and I think many. For me, it was 2016, and I was asked to play with an orchestra called the Dream Unfinished Symphony, and they were doing a very special concert honoring Black female composers, artists. We had some speakers, and another part of the focus was bringing awareness to, at that time, women who had been unfortunate victims of police brutality, where their stories were not really being shared in the public. And this was a very interesting, they even put up a slideshow. It was really moving. And I actually remember being there and looking and seeing names of women I'd never heard of before, because they just didn't make it to the media stories. So it was just really a powerful night that focused on, these social issues, but also brought us all together through music. And they were the ones that were aware of, of course, Florence Price and this Florence Price piano concerto. I was just asked to be the pianist to play it. And so when I got brought into the fold and was able to look at this piano concerto at length, I could not believe how powerful, how beautiful, how amazing this quite short piece. I mean, let's face it, for a concerto in around 18 minutes or so, for it to pack so much in, I just was so impressed. So that was the beginning. It just continued to blossom from there. As you can imagine, I couldn't wait to learn more about her. And I was reading about her story. And, I'm sure many now know a lot about her story, but generally just how she came from Little Rock, where she grew up in 1887. She's born there, and she grows up during a time where her family is actually part of the upper class. Her father was a dentist, her mother was a music teacher, and they were, treated with respect. And her father was a huge, he was a huge leader in the movement to keep equality in the South. And it was just this absolutely inspiring family unit here. And she goes on to New England Conservatory at 16. She comes back after a stint at Clark Atlanta University running the music department, again, success that she deserved. But she comes back in the 20s to Little Rock, Arkansas, and Little Rock has changed. It's drastically changed. And of course, this was happening gradually over time, but now she's back and she is not allowed to join the Music Teachers Association in Little Rock because she's Black. And it was just one of many things. I actually recently came across a picture. I have to say, this was so moving for me. I was in Little Rock just a month ago to give a concert and played some of Florence Price's music. Someone that was there came and showed me this picture, and he said that his grandmother had grown up, in Little Rock, and he had this picture of her as a pianist student, maybe 16 or so, in front of the Little Rock Conservatory, which is just a school that is what it used to be called, and it, serviced the area and students. And in the picture, you see the students and some of the teachers, but you can't help but notice that they're all Caucasian. And then you see right in the corner, and apparently this was missed. Even he didn't notice this initially. And his grandfather had noticed, and they blew up the picture. In the very corner of the frame is Florence Price. And it was something else looking at this picture, because I just felt, and we know this, how art and photos and photography, right? It can bring us back in time, right? You look at a photo and you just imagine the moment in time as if you were there. So that's what I did. And I just stared at this photo and I could imagine going back to this time where Florence Price clearly taught at that school. I'm sure she obviously was a teacher there. It's the 20s, she's got her degree. But most likely, considering the rules at the time, she either only taught students of color, probably in a separate space, or whatever it was, she had to stay somewhat separated under the auspices of the school. And so it was picture time, and she was not allowed to be in the picture. But she clearly was a teacher there. So just seeing that and knowing that here she is standing off to the side. I mean, this was a woman who had probably, arguably at that time, had a higher degree, higher pedigree training and everything than anyone sitting in that space at that point in time. But she was told, stay aside, you can't be in this picture. So at any rate, it moved me. I mean, the story is amazing. So of course she goes to Chicago to get away from, situations like this. She cannot grow in Little Rock. And that's where seemingly her life takes a huge turn by winning this competition. And Chicago Symphony premieres her work. I heard that Gershwin was in the audience. And so they clearly knew each other. And, so her name is on the map, being in Chicago. And that decade was fruitful for her. I mean, she wrote pretty much all her 4 symphonies. She wrote the piano concerto that you'll hear, 1934. She wrote a piano sonata, which also I perform a lot. We got many prizes. Big, a lot of her chamber works were performed in the 30s. So it was a fruitful year for her. But regardless of how much she wrote, what doesn't add up is how many premieres she got. She only really ever in her whole lifetime really got a huge premiere by a major orchestra with the Chicago Symphony. There was no other major orchestra of note that I could find that premiered her symphonies and her other works. And so, it's a disconnect. And I think as I digested her story over these years, which continues to inspire me, but also, I've been very hungry to take in more of her music. I've just really, delved into more of her piano solos, her piano chamber music, obviously listening into the symphonies and violin concertos and all these other things. And I continue to be amazed at the high level of her musicianship and and her composition skills. And all I can find is, her words, which resonate in my mind to this day, which were, please forgive the handicap of my race and gender and look past this, essentially looking past this to the music. And it resonates with me because that was the theme in her lifetime. It was that either you're going to be blocked because of your race, or it'll be your gender, or it will be both. But you have to somehow get past both of these things. Not just being a woman composer, a Black woman composer, before we accept you. So who can fight both of those battles, And so I'm proud. I'm so proud of her. I'm so amazed by her strength because, again, many of us would have caved and said, I'm finding another career. But that was not, again, possible for her. It's clear to me in her writing that she had a lot to say in music, and she had to write it down. So she did. And I mean, her catalog is huge. There's so much music out there. There's still music that's lost, that was never published. And I hope we find to this day. There was 3 piano concertos. We've only found 1. Mm-hmm. So look in your attics, everyone, because they found some of it in the attic of her summer home, I say.
Yeah.
That's where they found the piano concerto.
And the 4th symphony, I heard the 4th symphony was found in the summer home attic as well. And the 2nd symphony is still missing. So,
I didn't know it was still missing.
Yeah, the 1st, 3rd, and 4th we have, but the 2nd,
wow.
We have record that it was written, but we don't have the music.
I believe things will pop up. I really do. So,
yeah. So I want to ask just for you to tell a little bit of the story of what it was like to record the piece with New York Youth, because I have a friend that performed in that recording session, and it sounded like the craziest, most unique, wild, but also meaningful COVID experience that I think anyone I know had. So I'd love to hear from your perspective. What was this experience like?
I mean, it was everything you said, for sure, to start with. It, and it was so funny because I think I knew what was happening, but I didn't know what was happening. To be clear, I didn't really understand the breadth of what was happening until I walked into the space that day for the recording. So in other words, I knew that we were recording, and I think somehow things were lost in translation. For instance, I didn't know that we were recording just with the strings. I was going to record my part with the strings, and that the winds and brass and percussion would be recording later, and we'll get to that. And then I also wasn't even fully aware of the breadth of the whole production and what they were, with Judith Sherman, amazing producer, who they had on board and helping with this, and everything. I mean, I was just amazed at what they were able to put in place during that time, the end of 2020, to make this happen, and the passion behind the project. So I have to say, just walking in as a soloist and taking that all in, I just was, I was amazed. And I also was impressed, and I still am, by the students. I mean, it's a wonderful orchestra, the New York Youth Symphony. I'm actually playing with them this season in Carnegie with the Schumann Piano Concerto. These students really, really were just so excited and so dedicated to making this recording the best they could be under the circumstances. Like, I loved how much they took this seriously. And again, they were so grateful to do it. I mean, there's just something about kids or teenagers or, anything in that age group that kind of always brings us pause, because they, as we grow, I think life gets to us in various ways. And there's so many different stressors, as adults we have to deal with. And sometimes we forget, at least especially in the music world, when we actually have to worry about paying our bills with music and all these other things, that just the basic, when we all go back to what we felt like as teenagers or younger, that basic just love of music and the passion for something just because it means something. You know what I mean? Just like understanding that, I think, was beautiful. But right, so we do the recording with just the strings, and that was fine. And then I couldn't believe it when they told me, well, they're going to play in their earphones. They're all going to have earphones, and they're going to be listening to you on the piano and maybe the strings as well. I think it was just that recording, and they're going to play along with that. And I was, how in the world is this going to sound? How are we going to put this together? And that's, again, when you have a producer like Judith Sherman and you have a team like they had and everything else, that's how you do what they did. I couldn't imagine how they could put this together, but with, again, talented students and a great team, they did. And when it all came, it was pieces, right? So when they finally sent me the final product of the parts put together, I mean, it really was almost flawless in terms of, lining everything up. It really was. I mean, it's an experience I'll never forget.
That's really wonderful.
Yeah, I heard the story from my friend is a percussionist, so he would have been part of the other session that you were not at, but he said it was just a wild, wild experience.
Yeah. Well, so you are such this champion for Florence Price, and rightfully so. She's phenomenal. And I think beyond this, though, that you've done lots of things. There's lots of buckets of your work that are just so unique to dive into. So I wanted to, in 2019, you served as the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra's MAC Music Innovator for your role as an African-American classical musician who embodies artistry, innovation, and a commitment to education and community engagement, which is a lot of words all put together. But I was wondering if you could talk about this role, because I've always admired the Cincinnati Symphony and the efforts that they have have put forward, and they have some amazing programs. So I wanted to know, what was this role actually like, and what did you do in this space?
So this was unique, and I think, especially at that time, it was still fairly new. Maybe they'd had one person before me or two. So I think it probably has expanded a lot more since then. But at the time, it was interesting when we were having discussions about it. Essentially, they wanted to cater the fellowship and the residency, as one would have it, to both fit the artist that was the recipient that year, but also what was needed at that time in Cincinnati, around the community. Because essentially it's immersing the artist into the community in a variety of ways and having them interact, with, I think on some level, I was going through many, many different age groups and many different types of places. And then it culminates in a concert and collaboration as well with the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra members. So for me, I was out there for a week. And I was out there for 1 week for the residency and then another week for performances. But the first residency week, wow, I think I was trying to remember everywhere I went. I was at a children's hospital, and I played and I catered an interactive program that got, sent up into the rooms of especially kids who were, terminally ill, cancer patients and things like that. I mean, it was actually broad spectrum, but there were some kids who were able to come and watch me and some only watch from the room, but I was able to do a special program at the hospital. I was at a community music school that really had a wide range of adults and younger students that studied from, various backgrounds, and I did a master class. Some of them played for me and we got to talk about their pieces, and then I played at the end. And that was so much fun. I also went to a couple different schools and, basically presented in an assembly for, I don't even know, 200-300 kids. And so it was actually very interesting because I was in a lot of different spaces. Therefore, I had to shift, how I catered the offering to that group. I'm a huge believer in, you have to know and study your audience. You have to know, what is going to be the best way to reach them where they are. How can you help them feel like they've made this connection with you? I think it's tricky when classical musicians just have that sort of one-track mind. Well, right now I'm performing the entire set of Beethoven sonatas or whatever, and that's what I'm doing. So they're like, oh yeah, we need you to go around into schools or whatever. Okay, cool. And then they sit there and play like Opus 109 or 111, which is one of the later Beethoven sonatas, like 30-minute pieces, and then just say, well, here you go, because this is what I do, right? So then to me that's more about you, and it's not about those kids, because I want to leave the kids curious. I want to leave from that space having them learn something, having them want to know more about a composer. And so therefore I want to interact. I want to keep their attention, So it was fun. I think not only just getting into different spaces in Cincinnati, but also to be creative in my own prep for it, to say what will reach this group, what will work well in this place.
I think this is very cool. I am a Cincinnati native, by the way. I grew up in Cincinnati. I attended the School for Creative and Performing Arts and Walnut Hills High School. I don't know if you were at either of those for an assembly, but yeah.
No, I wasn't. Although that would have been cool.
But fond memories. And I love that you got to spend that time in my hometown.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now,
Cincinnati's awesome.
This year, you received a great honor from the Sphinx organization, which we have talked extensively about here on the podcast. You received the 2022 Sphinx Medal of Excellence. Can you share a little bit about what this honor means to me, as well as your relationship with the Sphinx organization?
Absolutely. It's, I'm so humbled by that award and by being a recipient this year, especially alongside the two people who I have so much respect for, Karen Slack and Randall Gooseby. The award itself, which, is given to, I think, young and, either up and coming or established artists that have, I don't know I can't remember the exact words of the exact wording of why we get the award, but the basis of the nominations, because again, we didn't know we were being nominated, and it's sort of all done anonymously, but the basis of that is to see, artists that have not only found success in their careers, whatever that is, but I think it's also for how we use our careers, right? And I think Randall and Karen as well show that very multifaceted career, and it's beyond just their ability, but it's who they are as artists. And I try to, again, that really matters to me as an artist as well. So that alone just meant so much. But the Sphinx organization, this award is one thing that they offer. I think I'm also really proud to be connected to them, because they have done so much in the music world to try and expand access to those who struggle to get, and resources too, to be able to get, lessons and to get, opportunities to perform and connect. And so they have, of course, their conference, and they have, the various, they have their competition. They also have scholarship programs for young students. And so there's just so much that they've expanded to help change the landscape. And it's just something that I am just so proud to be a part of. I see the issues that are there, and I do the best I can as an individual in Philadelphia, where I live, but they're having such a great reach, and I just appreciate being connected to them.
Yeah, I think that we've talked about Sphinx so much on this podcast, but the amount of education that they do, and the amount of that they take on kind of for the classical music world at large to educate a lot of organizations who don't have the institutional knowledge, or have chosen not to have the institutional knowledge about what some of these issues are, and how there are very easy pathways to just expand what you do and open up opportunities to young musicians and musicians of color. And I think that I just respect so much of what they do, and it's so cool that you got that honor. And this, it's so exciting. And we're coming kind of towards the end of our conversation here, so I'm gonna kind of pack a couple things into one thought here, and you can take what you want from it and kind of respond. But you're an educator in a lot of ways now. You teach at Curtis, but you also, you're this champion of Florence Price, and so and as being a Black woman classical music performer, I assume, I mean, we're here talking to you on a podcast right now, that you often get asked really hard questions about diversity, equity, inclusion, and what is the classical music world doing, and how can we do it better? And so I wonder if you could share with us a little bit about what your perception over the past few years has been since 2020, since the murder of George Floyd, about the pathways that we have taken to try to rectify, or some organizations are taking to try to rectify history and decades of hurt. But how can we, moving forward, make sure we're doing this in a way that is not tokenizing, in a way that we are lifting up voices and just allowing voices to come to the table instead of forcing voices to come to the table? So, I was in a good conversation the other day, and they said, if you're in a meeting and there's a Black person at the meeting and they're not talking, they're not volunteering any information, there's probably something wrong. You've probably not created an environment that is welcoming. And that was such an interesting insight. And I know there was a lot of thoughts I just kind of threw out there, but yeah, how have you been? Yeah, how do you feel over the past few years about this whole topic We talk about it on the podcasts, right? So this is kind of what we've been doing, but I'm interested to see what you think.
No, that's it's thank you. And there is a lot in there. Absolutely. So yes, I can, kind of just give you, at least from my perspective. And I appreciated what you said about not forcing, people to the table, but inviting them. I think that is the tricky line, right? Is the lens, was focused in on organizations in America after George Floyd. I think, because everybody started looking very closely at their own lives and their places of work and their organizations they support or what have you, and started to wonder, because I think there was that certain side which tends to precipitate change, right? Is guilt. There's some sense of, well, maybe we're not doing everything we could be doing, right? So, we feel badly about this. So then, hey, let's do something, right? Mm-hmm. So again, some people say, well, why did it have to take that? Well, sure, in a perfect world, that would be the case, and we would just do things because they're the right thing to do, and everybody would jump on board, and that would happen. But history has proven that that's not necessarily the way big changes happen. They often, unfortunately, have to be precipitated by problems, by events where we have to then re-examine, our institutions and ourselves. So that's where we were at, right? And I am happy that out of tragedy, there was moves to do better. But then the tricky part, no matter what, is then how do we do that, as you said? Because I did definitely feel that there was, sort of hard to avoid that, right? There's a certain amount of tokenism that you'll see in these moments. You'll also see people trying to, you can kind of tell the difference. I think there's that, okay, yes, we need to change it. And then there's the, hey, everybody's expecting us to change things, so let's just do something now without even thinking about, what to do. So for instance, it was very interesting to see how you'll see organizations that actually, thought, how about we bring some Black voices or, people of color, whatever, to the table in our board or wherever, and talk about these things, talk about what can we do over time that could, create lasting change in our organization. You could tell the difference with organizations that did that, and then the organizations that were like quickly trying to prove a point, and they blasted on social media and all their marketing, like, ooh, look what we're doing. And you could always tell, because you'll see stuff like, okay, fine, they program a piece by a Black composer or whatever, and then the rest of the program doesn't even have any kind of connection to that piece, which you could have actually found connections or thought through things, but you were just quickly trying to prove something. So you're like, okay, here we have a Black piece, and look what we did. And the other thing is, like, again, extension of that being and I'm happy to see this changing, right? So obviously I have totally heralded Florence Price for all the reasons I gave. But another thing I found interesting was, I performed it with Philly Orchestra in the beginning of 21. A lot of people were able to see that and, how I did it. And gratefully, though, there were those, orchestras or such that, were impressed by what I did and then wanted to book me to do it. So great, now I can share this piece, more nationally or hopefully internationally as well. But then it also was interesting in topics, in discussions with my agents into different things, where it was like, okay, well, at the same time, I don't want them to be that consolation prize, like, oh, good, let's bring Michelle to play Florence Price, and that's all. And it's actually really interesting because as a perfect, wonderful example with Canton, Symphony, I am, of course, doing the Florence, but I'm also doing Strauss Burlesque, which is, completely different. Well, in certain ways, not so different in terms of sort of untraditional, as I said, setup of a concerto. But at the same time, I do appreciate that line where it's yes, I am a Black woman pianist. That is true. And I absolutely identify and am proud of that. But I'm also a classical pianist, just a classical pianist who went to the conservatories and studied all of these composers just like everyone else. And so that's the part where I say making lasting change, right? Because ultimately, there's no way around the fact when you look at something and you say, hey, we haven't been doing well, there is like, we don't have diverse programs, we don't have diversity in our, our board or our, our leadership teams or whatever. And you look at it and you say, let's change it. Well, I agree with that. I think if you can make, immediate changes that make sense in certain ways, you do that. But it cannot stop there.
Yeah.
You have to then take those moves and then look ahead and go farther. And so those kind of things for me as a pianist is that, okay, absolutely, that's great. Thank you for promoting Florence Price. I'm happy to be part of that. But again, I can't be your, your token to your audience to say, look what we're doing. It has to be about the music. And it also just has to be about just me as an artist in general. So this isn't all I do, but this is a story I do love to tell. Yeah. Right? And so you can have both. You actually can. I tell people that all the time. It's like, it doesn't have to be. And I think that, again, one of the best ways to approach this properly, right? And I know that's happening with the orchestra here or in Canton, but one of the best ways to approach that is to make sure that you are bringing diverse voices to the table. And you were talking about how if the, one person that's Black isn't talking, there's a problem. Yes, that too. That's the other side. If you're going to bring voices to the table, then listen to those voices. Yeah. Then, and everybody can share and grow together. That's how you get lasting change and have it not be, hey, let's make a point today and then be done with it.
Yeah. That's a beautiful answer. Thank you.
And
Thank you.
A beautiful thing. I know we need to wrap up with our final question very, very momentarily. But a beautiful thing we saw this past year, we do have a more diverse board. Yeah. And at the general body meeting where all the staff and the board meet together, I was very thrilled to see that the Black voices in the room were not afraid to speak up and contradict some of the older voices that had been on the board for a while. And I was so happy to see that. It really, really made me so thrilled for our organization and for the work we've done over the past several years as we try to move forward into our next chapter. It really was wonderful.
Yeah. No, that's huge, actually.
Yeah,
that's huge. And I think a lot of people don't understand that, making that safe space that says, yes, we are trying to expand. It was so funny because, and I'll say this point, because I really believe this. It's very interesting because I believe on diversity really on all levels. I think it makes such a difference. I also think it makes a difference. Like, okay, let's say there's an organization that, might be servicing the Black community or whatever, and the entire leadership team and the entire board is Black. I don't even think that should be the case. Some people might not agree with me, but I'll tell you why. Because I feel that, again, if the goal, you know what I'm saying? If the goal is to create communities and environments where everybody feels like we can, live and work together and be, again, treated equally, then we have to all come to the table. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, again, I'm not trying to say that, that's bad because the entire board or whatever is Black. I'm saying that it's actually better if you have diversity, no matter what the organization is, of voices, because this is going to elevate, no matter what's going to elevate your program, your organization, whatever it may be, in the communities that you're in, because that's exactly what we're trying to get away from, which is creating the division in a country that does not need to be divided.
Yes.
Right. So I know we have to let you go, but I will ask you one final question, and that is the question that we ask to all of our podcast guests at the end of every episode. In a nutshell, from your perspective, how do we orchestrate change?
Oh, wow. What a question. I wonder what, and you end with it too, right? Oh my goodness. Well, okay. I mean, I think we kind of touched on, my thoughts on, how to orchestrate change. If I would add anything else to that, which I don't feel, I sort of said it, but yeah, I guess to summarize, I feel that it's just, yeah, I've got to go back to that same statement. I think that it's just bringing a variety of voices, bringing diverse voices together who care about, the program that they're part of, or the orchestra, or whatever, your organization is, that are passionate about, what they're doing, and bringing them together, working together to build your organization up. And this must start from the top. And so for me, I think orchestrating real change, lasting change, means that, organizations need to look at their leadership and constantly reevaluate, who's at the top. Do they care? Do they care about this change? Like, really, do they want the change? Do they care about the change? Because if they don't care and if they don't want it, then ultimately it will never last. Mm-hmm. And so I would say, yeah, for me, that's a big thing. And then the other side is to go all the way to the bottom, because I feel this way about, from students. Back to that whole idea of like a magic wand and you're good at your instrument, right? Doesn't work that way. Going back to the beginning of our podcast, when I was a little girl and my parents were giving me that support structure. So that's my other answer to that question. To orchestrate lasting change, it has to start from the bottom as well. From the very top and the very bottom. We need to invest in our kids. We need to truly invest in giving them support. Support the parents. The parents are huge. Help the parents figure out the best ways to support their kids, because they love their kids. Help them support their kids in practice, in focus, and keeping them, the kids that are passionate about what they're doing at their instruments, keeping them there and giving them that support, so that when it's time to go off to conservatory, like I did and many others, they're ready for it.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say thank you for joining us today. It's been just an absolute pleasure. And you're going to be here in Canton, and I'm so excited for that and for people to hear your music. And we're just so grateful. Thank you for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Michelle Cann, nationally renowned pianist, faculty member at Curtis, who will be performing with the Canton Symphony on October 30th.
Orchestrating Change is a production of the Canton Symphony Orchestra.
Our theme music was composed by Eric Gould and performed by Derek Snyder and Tim Adams.
Our audio engineer and mixer is Nathan Maslick, with video and audio editing by Shoreline Media.
Thank you for listening, and see you next time.